Hello, Celia. ¿Cómo
Hi,
estás?
Felix.
Hi. Well, you know what? Thank you for being here with an epistle. Today we're going to have an interview. I am Felix, and I'm a resource developmental coordinator. And so thank you, Celia, for being with us today in this evening. Uh, Celia, I know that you work in the school district, and I know you're involved with interpretation, especially in the educational system. But now, Celia, tell me a little bit about yourself, on what you do and your background.
Felix, thank you for having me and your interest in interviewing several interpreters all across this country.
Mhm,
Um, well, I came from Spain originally, and I came to United States, and I started working as a Spanish teacher at a high school in New Jersey. I'm still a Spanish teacher, but
mhm,
as I worked in the public school system, I saw that there was a great need for trained and professional educational interpreters. My school
mhm,
had what we call here in New Jersey a child study team, which is the multidisciplinary team that supports students in special education.
mhm,
And they needed somebody to interpret at their special education meetings. And probably as many interpreters in our community, many of the things that I started learning were just by doing, and I just jumped into it. And I sat in many of those meetings, and I interpreted, the best that I could. My languages
mhm,
are Spanish and English. Once I started seeing that there was something called Natisol, and Anna
mhm,
was teaching these courses in education and special education interpreting, then is when I started kind of like refining my skills thanks to
mhm,
these courses. And I became much more of a professional interpreter. And that's what I'm still doing today. I teach Spanish
mhm,
and I interpret at my school. Unfortunately, where I live, there aren't really lots of educational interpreters that are trained.
mhm,
I do know a lot of bilingual people in the school system.
mhm,
So I think that part of our efforts should actually be extending and disseminating this information as much as we can. And thankfully, now that we are in the age of online information and Zoom and and all these things, we can actually reach out to so many people that don't necessarily live in our neighborhood and are not in our community.
mhm,
And I think that we have been doing that through through the different like the Facebook groups that we have,
mhm,
the other support groups and the places where interpreters come together to share resources. I think that it's our responsibility for us to disseminate this information. And yes, but there are still pockets in this country where there are public schools and there aren't any trained professionals to
mhm,
serve students and their families who come from other cultures that are not, the native here and don't
mhm,
speak English.
mhm,
And we need to actually reach out to these, spaces in our country that need these professionals. I think one of the most crucial things that any public school can do to get in touch
mhm,
and communicate with culturally and linguistically diverse
mhm,
families is to actually follow their lead. And sometimes it's from the point of view of school, we always think that, we want to do the back to school night and we want to do like all these things that we have been doing forever and ever for the last, 10, 15, 20 years.
mhm,
And sometimes the activities that we organize in school to get together parents and school and families and stuff, they don't really work, with families nowadays. Our families are really hardworking people and sometimes
yes.
2, 3 jobs, and they may not always have time to show up at the school at like
Mhm,
7 p.m. on a school day because they may be working or they may not have childcare set up. So
mhm,
one of the best things that we can do
mhm,
is actually ask them how they want to be approached and how we want or how they want us to communicate with them. And one of the ways that we can do that is, sometimes when they come in and they register their students,
mhm,
or when they come, to drop them off, in the morning, whenever we actually have some type of informal communication with them is a good time for us them how they would want us to communicate with them. And very often, parents will ask, a phone call is okay, or they will say that a phone call is okay, or many parents nowadays, they would rather have a text, and they want text messaging because it's convenient, it's easy, and they can always get back to the school whenever they have a chance. And through text messaging, for example, if that's the parent's choice of communication, it's actually a great way that we can organize many things with our families that can maybe probably involve more time, or involve more like parent-teacher or school time, where they can actually come, or we can go to them in the community, sometimes going to recreational facilities that are within the community is actually a good way. Instead of making the parents come to us, it's a good way to actually go to the community and spend time with them. But I think one of the most important things that we can do is actually follow the family's lead and ask them how they would want us to communicate with them, and just honor their wishes. Instead of doing like big formal, like kind of like high stakes meetings with our families, where we actually are, we need to put, we're putting all our efforts into this like 1 hour meeting where we want to get like so much accomplished and stuff. Sometimes if we actually take the stakes out of the meetings, and we make them more informal, and we, instead of making them happen like once in a while, we have like a whole bunch of like really informal communication, much more frequent, like weekly and shorter, is actually a great way to keep each other abreast of what's going on, what school initiatives are happening that may be helpful for the student, and how the student is doing in school, their progress. So like constant communication, low stakes, is probably better than just like one single high stakes communication, where if something goes wrong, it actually goes wrong for a long time.
What advice do you have for educators and other school staff that work with interpreters?
People who work with interpreters, well, it actually depends on what type of interpreter. Like one thing is working with an in-house interpreter, like I am. Like I'm a school district employee. I go to work every day, and I'm part of the staff. And working with people like me is somehow easier because they see me all the time. They can, we communicate all the time. We can collaborate all the time. We know each other. We know how each other work. And it's easier to synchronize our styles of, our approaches to communication. If you work with somebody who is not an in-house interpreter, but like a freelance interpreter, somebody who is contracted, that's probably different. Probably you would be able to tell me more tips about that, because I understand that that's the type of interpreter you are. But I think that overall, people who work with interpreters need to be flexible. It's probably going to make the communicative event a little bit longer because you have an interpreter. If the interpreter at the beginning does the pre-session that establishes the kind of like the rules of engagement,
Yes.
it's actually a good way to just like set the expectations and have everybody access the meeting all at the same level, so that everybody knows what's going on. But I think that overall, approaching these types of meetings and events with a spirit of like wanting to collaborate and being flexible is probably one of the best pieces of advice I could give an educator who is about to work with an interpreter. It's a privilege to be part of this association. So thank you for this, and thank you for having me.
I want to thank you again, and this family wants to thank you too. And so we say goodbye. Adiós y que pasen muy buenas tardes.
Hasta ahora.
Adiós.